Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today, I'm going to be covering this book, Stranger in the Forest. It claims US $13, Canada $20 at the bottom as far as price tags go. I purchased this used, which means I paid for it probably significantly less. I do not know the actual price I paid for it though. This is copyright 1988. I can't tell when this was printed, but at least after 89. Now, I've mentioned this book in a couple other videos, including Tracks by Robin Davidson. I mentioned it in a couple other stories in reference to the fact that those stories tend to be from the 50s through the 80s, this one coming in later in that time period. And they all tend to be stories of some white person, some middle-class person from pretty well-off developed countries. And they are well-off enough or frugal enough to be able to take an extended stay in a country that is not developed at all. And usually this is for the love of nature, but sometimes the love of a culture that is perceived to be dying out or being changed by the contemporary era. This book, like I said, is from 88, but the actual content is from 82, I believe. Sarawak 1982. What's interesting about this is Eric Hansen is a well-read white man. I appreciate it for certain aspects, including the fact that he describes his travels across Borneo exceptionally beautifully. And he interacts with a lot of people in a very down-to-earth and humble manner. But he also does reference a lot of British classics. So, for example, he says on page 30, which is in the first chapter, "The aim of the trip was to cross the island following old trade routes, collecting jungle products and medicinal plants of value, and exchanging these and Western goods for what I needed. The concept was a masterful piece of scholarly lunacy, based on anachronistic information and my own half-baked notions of Sarawak that had been gleaned from a 12-day drunken visit 6 years earlier. I was to learn that Jimmy Singh had never been to the highlands and that there was an open border between Sarawak and Kalimantan for a very simple reason. It was almost impossible to move through that uninhabited, wild, jungle-clad mountain country. A passport wasn't necessary because there was no one to look at it. I anticipated The Lost World of Arthur Conan Doyle, and in doing so I made a thorough job of setting myself up for some breathtaking surprises in the jungle when it had long become too late to turn back." Which he basically discusses that he had a very European notion of what this area is going to be like, and as it turns out, once he gets out there, it's nothing like what he had expected, that time wasn't standing still in Borneo, even in the jungle. There were elements of modernization in every part of his journey. On page 89, he shows up at a place called Borneo. He says, "The best way to arrive in Borneo is on foot. It gives one a true sense of the extreme isolation that the highland people lived in until the end of World War II. So isolated that a head had not been taken from the Kelabit Highlands for 80 years prior to the war. Considering their downriver neighbors' propensity for gathering heads, that fact is even more remarkable. After a month in the rainforest, Borneo was the perfect place for me to rest and plan the next phase of my journey. I stayed in the Kelabit Highlands for 2 weeks. Aradalan and Borneo are 2 of the 10 longhouse communities to be found in the Kelabit Highlands. The slightly undulating terrain of this valley is ringed by giant green mountains and fed by innumerable small streams that originate in the mountain forests. And he goes on describing it like that. The rice fields dominate the landscape by carpeting the valley floor in a patchwork design of colors, ranging from brilliant lime green to yellow to mud brown and finally to shimmering blue-green, depending on the phase of the agricultural cycle. There's a interesting portion on page 187 here. No construction project could be started without first calling in a dayang to appease the appropriate spirits. Otherwise, the local labor force would refuse to begin work for fear of spirit retribution. There are many well-documented cases of major projects that experienced endless difficulties until the proper ceremonies were observed. Company reports tell of equipment failures, unseasonably bad weather, widespread illness, and absenteeism. Vehicles have been known to disappear into muddy roads overnight. Even Pertamina, the national oil company of Indonesia, hires a dayang to help launch a project. The company has learned from experience. Officially, animal blood has been substituted for human blood, but few, if any, inland people believe in this. From the Central Highlands, all coastal development plans are viewed with suspicion and fear. The villagers reason that if one longhouse pole traditionally required the blood of one human being, then how much blood from how many people is needed to construct a 30-story concrete office building? I had heard people from the highlands refer to construction projects in terms of their cost in human blood. By estimates, there are 200-person hydroelectric schemes and 100-person bridges. Development projects are rarely seen as employment opportunities. So it's a very fascinating exploration of a land that I am 100% certain I will never see in my lifetime. Not that I really have an interest to the very humid, rainy forests of tropical regions are not of any interest to me, but it is fascinating these adventures and misadventures of a writer who got in over his head and expected there to be less than there actually was, and so is delighted to experience and immerse himself in these cultures, and it's really fascinating. I cannot get over it enough. This is a really good book. I've talked about it in less than respectful ways in the past. It is more than just privileged white man exploring less developed country. It's kind of similar to that. It's kind of similar to The Snow Leopard. It's kind of similar to Tracks. It's similar to other books of that nature. But just like those books, what makes this interesting is that the author, once confronted with their prejudices, they humble themselves and really see the humanity in the people he is experiencing these moments with. There's a really interesting incident on page 250 that reads, "Only then did I understand why these people preferred to hunt with spears and dogs rather than with guns. Guns are impersonal. Anyone can pull a trigger. By hunting with the spear, the hunter is giving the animal a chance. It may be a small chance, but the accompanying element of doubt created, for me at least, the most exquisite sensation of being drawn back into man's past. Tuan, you have killed the Payal. I thought you would never move. You waited for the last moment." Pa Ubang's voice broke into my thoughts. I glanced at his legs and was shocked. They looked as though someone had taken a cricket bat to his shins. The skin was broken in many places and massive swelling had already started. His legs would soon be an ugly mass of black and blue lumps. I apologized for my hesitation and said that I hadn't known what to do. "Tidak apa," in parentheses, translated, "It's all right, Mr. Eric," said Pa Ubang. "The bones are not broken. I can walk." We dragged the carcass to a nearby stream and butchered it. When Pa Ubang disemboweled the carcass, he removed the penis and set it aside. I had never seen that done before and was surprised that it was more than a foot long. Pa Ubang told me that it would be sold to a Chinese pharmacist downriver. "What for?" "For deer penis whiskey," he replied nonchalantly. The Chinese and Malays believe that by strengthening the kidneys, a man strengthens his sexual appetite. Deer penis whiskey is for strengthening the kidneys. It wasn't until months later that I confirmed this story in a shop in San Francisco's Chinatown. The man behind the glass-topped counter filled with dishes of unrecognizable medicines gave me a recipe for deer penis whiskey. Take one dried deer penis, 9 to 12 inches long, and slice thinly. Soak the slices in whiskey or brandy for 40 to 60 days. Strain. Drink one shot glassful per day until vitality is restored. And so he's experiencing these really cool things. Hunting with spears, he's traveling the jungle on foot, he's crossing borders. It's a really impressive adventure that he gets up to in the 80s. That's very recent compared to a lot of the other stories I've discussed on this channel. And so The Stranger in the Forest is fun. I do think it should be read with the understanding that it is someone from a developed country who has the wealth, the money to take this time off in his life to go gallivanting across a less developed country, but with the humility that he sees the humanity in all these people. He sees their highs and their lows. He sees them for who they are, and that makes for a very fun story. This book has pretty small font size and is about 285 pages long of content. Actually, probably closer to 270. There are a lot of pages in here with photos, and those take up the entire space of the page. So, overall, I liked Stranger in the Forest. I've read it a couple times. I have so many books on my list that rereading this isn't likely to happen anytime soon, but it's a very good book, and I think if you like those stories about someone traveling in a less developed country by themselves, kind of living vicariously through them, that is a very good opportunity. This book, Stranger in the Forest, is a very good opportunity for you to read. So yeah, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.